Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you all. I work in Csiro, the National Science Agency. We've got about 5,500 staff spread right across Australia into pretty much every field of science. And I'm in Data 61, the digital science part, which is 1,000 staff. And my team is 12 researchers whose job it really is to look at the next 5 to 20 years ahead of Australia and use techniques of strategic foresight to flesh out forthcoming trends, risks, scenarios about what the future might hold. So we've been doing this in earnest for about 10 years. It was 10 years ago I was sat down in a cafe by a senior colleague in Csiro who basically said we need someone to tell us about the 10-year plus pipeline for the organisation. And we looked at all different sorts of techniques and methods for exploring the future. Shell's scenario planning was of interest to us, but we landed on the concept of megatrends, which was from a US academic, John Naisbitt. Now, that's where a lot of trends and drivers come together to create a significant trajectory of change. So I'll give you an analogy about megatrends. So rips in the Australian surf are deadly. 200 people in the last 10 years have lost their lives to rips, and 4 million Australians have been in a rip. They're not deadly if you know how to handle them, and there is actually an excellent description on the Australian Surf Lifesaving Association website about what to do if you are in a rip. You don't swim against it. It isn't going to drag you under the water, it's just going to take you out. But you're not totally at the mercy of the rip either. You want to swim to the side and stay relaxed, and you'll eventually find your way back. Whilst they're deadly, they're also what surfers will use to get out to the break. So there's pluses and minuses. They're in one case deadly, but otherwise quite a useful phenomena. So they're hard to see, and this purple dye here illuminates a rip off a Sydney beach. University of New South Wales researchers put it in. We can see what's going on. And that makes it a lot easier to read this future. That's what megatrends are about, the analysis of social, economic, environmental, technological trends and drivers to comprehend this pattern of change so that you can interpret it and know how to respond. Once you know you're in a rip, it's a lot better. A lot of the people who have died in them don't even know what's happening. They'll swim against really hard because something terrible is going on, and that's an instinctive response. Once you've understood that you're in one and know how it's working, you can survive it. So that is the concept of a megatrend, and we've built a lot of analytics and thinking around how to define them. So one of our early clients, as we started to do this work and went very public with the results, Michael Cameron, who's now CEO of Suncorp, but at the time was CEO of GPT, a property company, and we did an analysis of megatrends in his sector, and retail was about to get reshaped by online and digital technology, and one of our megatrends was called behind the scenes. So every time you hit click and buy on an online website, you trigger a background supply chain, and that's where they put about $1.2 billion of the company's money. They sold a lot of assets and reinvested into warehouses around shipping ports and airports, trucking and logistics, and the market really responded very well to that. So there was a really positive outcome from the correct reading of a megatrend. And I'd argue around your farm enterprises that you're managing, there are megatrends, and how you go really depends on how well you read them. So today I want to give you a glimpse into the research. We'll be doing a formal launch of this at Sydney Vivid Light Festival on the 15th of June if you're interested. But this is a sneak peek into the latest sort of thinking on our view of the future. So since 10 years ago that we've been doing this, we've been keeping alive this trends database. Initially, it was just our scientists putting all of the trends information onto it, but we've opened it up and we've done about 30 studies in different sectors now, so we're building this view of the future. And the first of the megatrends I call more from less, and we heard that in the introductory video because I think that is an apt description of the challenge ahead of a lot of farming enterprises. As the human population has crossed its 7 billion persons threshold, Australia goes from about 24 to 32 million. Increasing incomes is associated with increased consumption of food, water, mineral and energy resources, which means a whole lot of innovation about doing it more efficiently and effectively. The next one we call Planetary Pushback, which captures climate change, which is going according to plan. The longer term forecasts from the climate scientists I work with in Csiro are happening, and they tell me the biggest stuff happens 2030 and out, so we're just getting a taste of what's going on now. And it's a challenge that we've got to adapt to. We also put into that one what's happening at the microbial end, and that's the phenomena of antimicrobial drug resistance, or bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics we use to kill them. Now, the good one about that phenomena is it'll stop you worrying about climate change. The bad thing is everything else, in that my little brother's head of infectious diseases at Royal Brisbane Hospital, and this has become a major issue in that the World Health Organization report recently came out and said some country populations have up to 52% of the population carrying bacteria resistant to penicillin, and humanity does not want to lose penicillin. It's a really vital antibiotic. So some significant changes that we have to deal with. The Silk Highway is about changing Asian markets and economic change. So we know the growth story from Asia is huge, and we have that data. What we want to point towards is the restructuring of Asian economies as they move through industrialization phases into advanced service sector economies, more closely approximate ours. Massive demand for food and fibre is associated with this, and provenance-assured food and fibre that is safe and high quality. And the functional food markets, in Japan, for example, are huge as ageing populations over there increase the demand for foods that actually have some sort of health benefit. Forever young is the next one, ageing population. Currently, we are 14% over the age of 65 in Australia. It will get to 24%. Some regional centres like Rockhampton will be 50% over the age of 65 by 2050, which is a really quite unworkable situation. Healthcare expenditure continues to rise, and I think we could argue rising unsustainably. We've put sort of basic straight line projections through state government healthcare budgets, and we will spend all of the government's money on healthcare by beyond 2050 if we go at the current trajectory. And there's rising rates of chronic illness and sedentary behaviour as we move more behind the screens and increase the amount of screen time. We're becoming more sedentary. The next mega trend I call digital immersion, and this is the rising capability and penetration of digital technology into everything we're doing. So my team is working currently on the artificial intelligence roadmap for Australia, where Australia wants to go with this new and powerful set of technologies, and the artificial intelligence ethics framework. And I think a lot more is going to come out in this space fairly soon. But in the field of artificial intelligence, what's got us all excited is we've built machines with the ability to learn and problem solve unaided. The agricultural robots that will be deployed on your properties will be able to learn what's a weed and what isn't, and how to manage it, and literally just tear it out of the ground so you don't have to use pesticides and herbicides. But a lot of other capabilities will be there. The strawberry harvester will learn how to pick a strawberry without damaging it. There's about to be a lot of robotics unleashed into agriculture. And Australia is at the forefront of this. I'd say Israel and the United States are the only other countries competing in these areas, but we are also set not only to use the tech here, but to export it to the world. Porous Boundaries is the story of how the markets change and how we interact differently in a digitally enabled economy. The Uberization of everything and the rise of platform-based models will impact agriculture, and it's interesting to me that we haven't really seen an eBay for agriculture in a very big way yet, or an Alibaba. I know that in some of the tech giants are interested in this space, but there's no reason these sorts of models can't work, and I wonder why that hasn't happened more yet. And lastly, great expectations is the human experience factor, and I want to argue a bit counter to the digital trend there, that the real and physical world get more important to us. As you get digitally immersed, you actually want to unplug and live in a real world. Why a Venn diagram? Just very quickly, so we had a driving holiday in North Island, New Zealand in our family a year ago, fantastic holiday, and we put these three mega trends of children, ice cream and car trip together with a lot of windy roads too. And we were able to get strategic responses to manage some of those combinations in the family, but we've not yet been smart enough in our family to work out a strategic response that manages all three, and we ended up with a sticky mess and ice cream flavoured vomit in my favourite hat that had to get put in the bin at Auckland Airport. Not Maddie's fault. So that concept, though, of the megatrends that I put in the previous diagram, the Venn diagram, is a real one, in that if you can put yourself at the centre of these powerful forces, the same way the surfer who gets to surf inside the tube and has a fantastic time has read accurately all of the powerful forces out there in the sea, the powerful forces that sit around your farm enterprise are what you're wanting to read and understand how to harness them together, and you get a really good outcome. So let me jump into some of the data sets that sit behind this analysis quickly. So at a very high level, we heard about food, a 60 to 70% increase in the total amount of food this world will produce, a massive increase. So your industry is in this backdrop of enormous growth, no matter what happens. And all of our analysis that I've seen at Csiro keeps telling us the world has no problem making enough food. Innovation and technological advances, even moderate ones, will continue to feed the world. Its starvation is associated with warfare, armed conflict, corruption. That's the drivers of it. But again, massive demand for food and different types of food. So protein consumption is something that we know is rising considerably, and this is a fantastic phenomenon as a lot of people across the Asia region are escaping malnutrition here. The top line there is Australian protein consumption rates. The data comes from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Programme, but the others are rising pretty quickly. But we've analysed the China economy a lot, and they absolutely had to sign the free trade deal with Australia in 2016, I'm thinking, I think it was, in the Brisbane G20 meetings. because if they didn't, they can't get enough food into China. And we've looked at all different sorts of markets, like bananas, for example. They did not used to eat bananas much there 10 years ago, couldn't afford them. But today, there's massive banana consumption, and it's all coming into China. And we looked at nuts and all types of different fruits, a really, literally hungry economy and a much more diversified table. So there is a huge opportunity to respond to that. And what we also know is provenance really matters. So I took my son out for a cross-country running competition west of Ipswich, and we were in the farmland near the running track, and we looked west and we saw a Boeing 737 taking off out of farmland, and we couldn't work out what was going on until we twigged it was the cargo flight out of Wellcamp Airport, which was a purely private sector-led development, taking high-value Aussie agricultural produce direct into Hong Kong. So whatever's on that plane has got to be worth a bit to justify the transportation cost, but it is, and there is a marketplace for boutique, specialised and provenance-assured foods. It's huge. And I think those colleagues here from New Zealand, your country is doing a better job than ours at the moment on capitalising on this through the High Value Nutrition Program, which is a joint industry government initiative there. So I've been over and seen that and been part of that at the early stages, and it's a really logical positioning play into what is a massive growth sector market, and quite an interesting reinvention of regional and rural Australia too. Energy is a big part. The world is going to be hungry for a lot more energy, around a 30% increase overall, a 70% increase in electricity, especially as we go towards automated vehicles. And I'd say around mid-2020s, the petrol-powered car will start costing you more than the electric alternative. So the electric vehicle at the moment is more expensive. It's largely down to batteries. But as we go electric vehicles, electricity demand will rise with a huge amount of electricity infrastructure being built. That's a solar farm off the Sunshine Coast, which will power all of the Sunshine Coast Council's electricity requirements. Battery prices will fall, is what the top left diagram there is showing us, roughly a halving in the cost of battery prices, and that's what will bring down the cost of electric cars. It'll mean rooftop solar combined with battery systems will reach price parity with the grid about now. So that's already happening. And mass production, sort of as Ford and Volkswagen are two companies which are currently building huge production facilities for the next generation of electric cars. There's other companies doing it as well, but these are some of the largest ones that are happening. As they mass produce electric vehicles, they've got to mass produce batteries, which will bring energy storage costs right down. So that's my house in Taringa in Brisbane, and we're putting solar panels on the roof. We haven't put the batteries on yet, but it's a CSIRO spin-off company called Energen, and it's effectively, they work out the solar radiation on your roof, determine the likely needs and the optimal sort of battery configuration. But it's getting pretty close to price parity for me. It's not a sort of environmental reason to do this. This makes sense in terms of cheaper electricity for me, and also resilience, so that when the power goes down, the system continues to work. So a lot of Australians are currently looking at these systems, and there is an expectation that things start to cycle quite quickly as the battery costs fall. Next one I want to talk about is climate change, or planetary pushback. So this graph here, the recent Bureau of Meteorology study, the Environment Report coming out Tuesday, puts a whole lot more data in front of us, which can't really be seen to be good news. But this graph here shows us unambiguous directionality on the temperature trend. Okay, so there is increased certainty about the climate models that we had historically seem to be getting more and more accurate. And the biggest stuff is for the future. It's 2030 and beyond. This was one of the most harrowing papers published in the journal Nature that I've seen on climate change, because it kind of cuts to the chase here on heat waves, and it puts humidity on that graph against temperature and then has a lethal curve. So you go beyond that lethal curve, you effectively get dead as you move into those hotter environments. So, because it's humidity combined with temperature. So the analysis is about what percentage of the human population will be subject to this, and it's sort of up there with from 48 to 74%, depending on how much greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2100. But an increased incidence of heat wave, serious heat waves, is likely for Australia as one of the dimensions of climate change. So overall, I think as a nation, we're underprepared for what's in the pipeline for us, and that we need innovation around resilience to climate change and new ways of doing things. We can totally get there. There is so much scope to be smart, but the time is now to start finding solutions. So that's a forward-looking view of RC, one of the moderate climate change shifts in terms of where heat waves will occur around the world. The CSIRO Climate Analogues tool is another one to play around with too. You can see what Sydney becomes like Maitland or Newcastle in 2030 and where it gets to by 2050. So this tool allows you to plug in your town and work out what a current climate might be like for it in the future, and it gives estimates of temperature and rainfall change. It is affecting decision making. I'm interested to know the extent of what this really might be happening, but this was one public case where Brown Brothers indicated that due to their records on rainfall and temperature, they have shifted from Victoria after 120 years, and they have moved down to Tasmania. So I wonder whether that is happening more and we aren't yet able to pick it up. Antimicrobial drug resistance is an enormous challenge. The World Health Organization in January last year put out a report which captured the latest state of knowledge, and a new update will come soon, but up to 80%. So this results from excessive and incorrect use of antibiotics, which has built up resistance over time. Partly the use of antibiotics in livestock production has fueled this shift. Up to 82% of human populations in some countries are infected, 52% against penicillin. So it's a looming challenge. So we've changed the world at the microbial end as well. And a lot of you will also be aware of the challenges of herbicide and pesticide resistance. The use of herbicides and pesticides over the last 50 years or so has built increased resistance. That's a diamondback moth. You can spray it with anything and it will not die. And that's because it's developed resistance, and it eats cabbage and broccoli. So my kids would be happy to see it disappear, but it is still a part of a larger trend. So let's jump into the Silk Highway. This map here is based on algorithms from a London academic called Danny Kwa, and he works out the hotspot. He's an economist. He works out the hotspot of global GDP. So think of it like a fry pan, but instead of emanating heat, all those countries are emanating GDP, economic output. So where is it hottest? In the year 1980, the hot spot is in the Atlantic Ocean between the powerhouses of the United States and Europe, as they emit most of global GDP. By the year 2030, it is between India and China, as these two massive economies have continued to grow at rates of 6 to 9% per annum compared to OECD economies growing at 2 to 3% per annum. And that's shifted the whole world economy. I'm in Hanoi in May, this May, so to present one of our research reports on the future of the Vietnam digital economy. A huge marketplace is happening there for Australian agriculture, but also a really interesting economy with average age of people at 30.4 years, very low GDP per capita, but really quite strong rates of GDP growth at 6.2% per annum. So this is the marketplace for a lot of the produce that gets created, and Australian produce has this awesome reputation in Vietnam, in Malaysia, and all of the places I've been to across Asia, and that is a really significant thing for us to move forward with. The change happened quickly. That's Shenzhen, which has built a rate of skyscraper a day and a boulevard per week during the 1990s. The next 20 years of Shenzhen don't look the same though. Shenzhen helped keep Australia rich during the global financial crisis because iron ore needed to make the steel which was needed to make Shenzhen so quickly was selling at $200 a tonne, and that's our biggest export. But when that iron ore price came down, now because it's levelling off, the rate of steel consumption is levelling. And that green and red line there crossing over in China, this is our biggest trading partner by far and has a profound effect on the Australian economy. But that switchover is from industrialisation into an advanced service sector economy that wants education, healthcare, science and technology to do its own agriculture and clean up environmental pollution problems. There is a big export opportunity in this story for Australia, so we kind of need to look at where this market is going. It's a new set of things. It's not just coal and iron ore. It's boutique and diversified foods, but all the science, tech, knowledge, know-how, systems for doing agriculture and its own mining better. Forever young is the ageing population. So we are currently 14% over 65. We get to 24% over 65, which will change what's possible. The agricultural workforce, I think, has a median age of 56 years, and that's up from about 53 years several years ago. So ageing population is happening here, which means robotics and machinery get more important on the farm to help with older workers. But changing demand in healthcare as well. It's not just Australia. Around the world this is happening. Japan is a good country for us to look at if we want to know what it's like with its population. What is the statistic there? It's 36% over the age of 65. So, and the poverty rate for Japanese males is double that of other OECD countries due to the high costs of retirement. So we are moving towards that. Aged care is struggling to meet demand today. There is no chance we meet aged care service requirements by 2030 without innovation and all sorts of changes to how we do things. In our artificial intelligence work, we want to see this as one of the focuses of AI that lets every Australian stay at home for the remainder of their life via sensory systems and assistive tools inside the house. So that can bring costs down, but we need innovation to be able to meet the reality of our future ageing population. Retirement is getting pushed back later in life. Younger people in the audience here should never get to retire according to our models, which is good for you because you end up with better mental and physical health, actually, if you have some and the correct connection to the workforce later in life. You should not stop work all in one hit. It's actually quite fundamental to who you are as a person, is what the research shows us. But you want to scale back and change the nature of your work. So the report here will open up with Australia's ageing population is an asset that we are underutilising in the workforce. It has knowledge and wisdom that we can actually use to make things a whole lot better, and we don't do a great job of that. Healthcare spend, any statistic that we put forward here, this is Australian government spending on healthcare at the national level. The state governments are a lot steeper and a lot higher in numbers than what's shown here, and individual healthcare expenditure is several percentage points above general expenditure increase in the economy. So we are unable to meet this future healthcare cost as well. Physical inactivity is part of it. Increased sedentary behaviour and screen time across all professions and for children as well is associated with 21 to 25% of breast and colon cancers, 27% diabetes, 30% heart disease. And the vast majority of Australian adults have not got to their 30 minutes of intense physical activity today where you break a sweat. And children at 60 minutes, and a significant number of Australian kids aren't as well. So there are some preventative health elements to this future that we're heading towards as well. Digital immersion is where we spend a lot of time. Artificial intelligence and automation is something that we've been working on a lot, and I think over the coming months we're going to start to see a whole lot of really exciting stuff, hopefully, in this space. But this photo here comes from the Mojave Desert in 2004, which was the first attempt to do automated vehicles by the United States DARPA, Defense Military Research Organization. So they funded this competition to do automated vehicles across the Mojave Desert. On day one, the course was 230 kilometres long. None of the vehicles made it past 13k into that course, and they were hopeless. They were crashing into each other, coming off sand dunes and bushes. You'd laughed at it, and you wouldn't have figured it would be a thing. The next year, all but one crossed the line. The year after that, they were getting really good times. 2010, Google built a driverless car that passed the human Nevada state government licensing test of driving through all the witches' hats. So it happened pretty quickly. Engineers fixed and resolved a lot of things. So the analogy here is what will happen with the artificial intelligence capabilities we have today as they get deployed onto your farms. They will get better really quickly. The robots that are able to drive around and scan the ground and look for weeds and remove them with a physical claw, which avoids the problem of herbicide resistance, that will get better and better and rapidly deployed is where we're at. Behind it is machine learning, and when Google's company DeepMind built a program called Alphago, which was pitched against the world's best human player at the Chinese game Go, which is more complicated than chess. It involves advanced strategy. It was able to learn from Lee Sedol, and other play data was put into Alphago, and using neural nets, it was able to trick him into a pattern of play that then let it win the game. A year later, though, and the paper is in Nature if you're interested, a year later, the same team put forward another one called Alphago Zero. This one was different to Alphago in that it had no human play data fed into it. It learned the game of Go tabula rasa from scratch with just the rules, and it played games against itself until it developed a whole lot of advanced strategies that let it beat Alphago, which beat Lee Sedol 100 games to nil. It's the bit that has got us out of bed on artificial intelligence, and why countries around the world have invested $86 billion, from Canada being the first, Germany with the most recent at a $4.7 billion announcement. Why this is happening is because of machine learning. The machine can learn and problem solve unaided and give us solutions we didn't know about. And this is very exciting in science, because where we've hit a wall on solving some type of problem, the machine might be able to create new solutions. So pretty much every field of science that's being done in CSIRO, and a lot of my colleagues are moving heavily into equipping themselves with this capability of machine learning. It'll be across everything we do, but it will be deployed at the farm level as well. What does it do to jobs is something that's been pretty heavily asked. Michael Osborne, a couple of years ago, published this paper looking at 702 unique job types in America. about which ones would be automated and which not, came up with 47% of jobs getting done by a robot or a computer. It's been heavily debated and may not play out that way. AI has limitations. So this is Brett, the Berkeley robot for the elimination of tedious tasks. And the team at the University of California, Berkeley, had the challenge of getting Brett to pick up a towel off the floor, fold it, put it on the table. So after 7 years worth of effort, the best time they managed to get for Brett was 20 minutes, which every human can beat, apart from a teenager who just walks over it every time. But Brett is pretty hopeless. The reason is because of the ambiguity and non-routine nature of a towel on the floor. What is a corner? What is a fold? Where do I pick it up? These are things your brain sorts through pretty quickly. So, we are building artificial intelligence that flies planes, plays chess, Chinese game Go, all sorts of things way better than you can, things that you find hard. But we are decades off building AI that will tie up your shoelaces. So there is a limitation. Now, what does that mean for the workforce? And I think that out of one of our studies on the future of work, we looked at this, and there were this is the bifurcation of labour markets, and when you have these thoughts when you tell your kids about what sort of thing to study and do for their future jobs. So in the photography industry, we break out two types of jobs. One that is routine, repetitive, rules-based, and quite structured, the laboratory staff who develop the film. The other one, the green line, is the field photographer. That requires creativity, judgment. The wedding photographer in that line needs a lot of emotional intelligence to do what they do. And the two jobs have diversified, split. One has grown, the field photographer has grown very rapidly, the other one's almost disappeared. This will be what happens in the agricultural sector as well. All the tasks inside what you do that are routine, repetitive, rules-based, and can be automated, we want to automate. You want to automate them as fast as you can because it frees you up for the green line tasks, which is where you have greater return on your time invested. And that's artificial intelligence done well in the labour market as we adapt to the green line jobs. We also need to reskill and upgrade. To be able to manage the farm well in 2030, you'll need to have an understanding of data science, potentially machine learning. You may need to learn a coding language like Python or Google's TensorFlow to be able to make full use of all the data and information that is swirling around. So this report has a look at it, and by 2040 we need another 3 hours per week on average, or 33% more over our lifetimes, and a lot more of our learning happens later in life. So for all of us here, we've got a lot to learn to be able to function in this world of digital. Porous boundaries is what it does to the marketplace and how it changes how things work. And Ronald Coase won the Nobel Prize last century for his theory of the firm about why corporations got big and dominated economic activity last century. And that was because they could, it was asymmetries of information they could control, hold on to, and selectively release information, and also economies of scale. They could do things pretty efficiently. But the Ubers, the Airbnbs, Amazon, eBay, a lot of the massive tech giants now that have emerged so quickly have changed those fundamental rules. So economics needs a fundamental rethink as we move into this digitally enabled world, and we can see that in what is now the world's largest companies. The digital technology really changes what's possible, and it can be used by everyone here to get an unfair advantage in global commodity markets as well. They're spending big on R&D, and this is probably a concern of ours as we look at AI, but Amazon, for example, spent $30.1 billion on R&D last year. This compares to Australia's entire public and private everything is spent on R&D of $34 billion. So Microsoft, Google as well is a huge spender, and a handful of these tech companies are doing a lot in R&D and building this pipeline for future capability. So as Coles and Woolies compete with Amazon in the grocery sector, they're going to struggle because they may not have the data science and advanced tools like Alexa that we can have a human language conversation with about the groceries, and that it's able to put it together and order to us directly. So digital technology, Woolworths recently did advertise for a head of machine learning and artificial intelligence while we were doing the report, and has built a whole team around it. And that's kind of an interesting development. To run a supermarket by 2030, it's not an optional, it's pretty well essential to have these capabilities. And I think the same will happen in agriculture. Distributed ledger technology, you would have seen a lot with things like Bitcoin and Litecoin and the cryptocurrency phenomena that happened last summer. The prices went up and came down. A lot of that was pure speculation. However, the algorithms that sat behind it were interesting to us, and that was the ability for me to send you something of trust and value online without intermediary, without a bank or any other kind of financial institution. And that continued to work. Once I gave you my Bitcoin, you had it and I lost it, and that was put onto the ledger and it worked, and that's why the prices were able to move. So yes, it was speculation, but what is the important thing to take out of that are the underlying distributed ledger technologies, the blockchain algorithms that allow the transfer of trust and value online in addition to just information. So I think they will find their way back. They may play an important role in a provenance assurance. They may help you prove that the tomatoes came from your farm here in Australia, and the Chinese customer who flashes the iPhone over them is able to verify provenance via these sorts of technologies. I think we're moving into a world of techlash. This has been identified recently in the news as the concerns about images and videos being circulated on massive social media websites and the slow close down of those. There's been a response by governments towards the tech companies. Are they doing enough? But in a lot of ways, this was the European case of an antitrust case brought against Google for 2.4 billion euros, which is a massive fine for them to pay, as they were warned about favouring their shopping services over local companies inside Europe time and time again and didn't respond. But I think the period of our amazement with the tech giants is moving into a period of slightly different, more concern and what I would call techlash. Privacy concerns around Facebook have also heightened this phenomena, and also the concerns parents have and kids have around anxiety and stress, which is being well established as highly linked to excessive use of social media. Some interesting challenges lie ahead of us too, in that there are ethical dilemmas being created in the world of data science and artificial intelligence around privacy, and when algorithms are used to make decisions that impact you quite significantly. So Mayor de Blasio, after a couple of incidents where algorithms were used to automatically sack teachers that were underperforming in schools, they were stopped, but this led to a whole lot of thinking, and then the Mayor of New York City introduced this requirement for an algorithmic assessment task force. And their job is to look at the transparency, fairness, and equity of any AI algorithm applied that affects people in New York City, and if it doesn't meet the standards, it shouldn't be used. But I think we will see these sorts of mechanisms and responses move. Germany has already released guidelines on who the automated car should run over and who not, and how it should handle that, and there's some really interesting debates in that field about, you know, should the driver have a knob which they can control the ethical behaviour of their car for protect driver, protect passenger or pedestrian. You know, those sorts of things are actually a bit real in the world of autonomous vehicles. We will see level 4 autonomous vehicles for sale on the roads in Australia, arguably already if you believe Tesla. But these are kind of realities that we need to cross. So just moving towards a wrap-up, great expectations, the human expectations for real experiences in the future. The real world has gone nowhere. Despite a decade's worth of digital alternatives, cinemas, libraries, museums still get great visitation rates. People still come to conferences together like this with all of the digital alternatives, and I don't think it's going anywhere. People still like people still like the physical world. You probably walk past a couple of coffee shops to get to the one you like. It's not just caffeine. You know, is it fair trade? What's the ambience? Baristas should have got automated according to our models too, rules-based, repetitive, but that's until you start to look at the fact they smile and talk to you and they make you feel good in the morning, and some of them know your name. So there is a broader interaction going on, and this is true for agriculture, is to understand the human experiential factor at the end of the production chain that you have. And they may be a human in a different country some distance from you, so you've got to prove what you think they need to know, but understanding that human experience factor at the end is important. And in terms of digital strategy, me and my colleague from my team, George, were looking for a Sydney cafe to get a client an email off a report pretty quickly. We jumped into this one, and we're like, where's the Wi-Fi? It's a big report. We've got to email it, and ladies pointed us at the sign. So we couldn't send the email, and we wondered whether this Sydney cafe actually has its digital strategy right for the future, and that is perhaps going to differentiate it from the others. So the final thought to wrap on is around innovation. It was mentioned as the fifth leader there. I think that's accurate. I think this is time to rattle the cage and experiment with new ideas more than ever before. Digital allows you to test new ideas in the marketplace at lower cost. Get it wrong the first time, go into another cycle, test again. A lot more of that needs to be happening because that creates opportunity. Clayton Christensen is a Harvard academic who's written on innovation a lot. He says organisations are genetically engineered to kill off the innovation that's going to save them, and probably individuals are as well. And that 9 times out of 10, we do the right thing by killing off this crazy new idea. It doesn't fit, it doesn't have a revenue stream associated with it, it's weird, we kill it off. Problem is, the 10th time is the thing that actually turned the business around. The 10th one, and it's impossible to know at the beginning, the 10th one was what changed things, and that would have been the case for Eastman Kodak, who he studied, if they could have, kept that whole set of 10 and then held on to the model that allowed them to go through the digital transformation rather than going bankrupt. So innovation remains important. You know, another Harvard academic says, you know, you want big business, follow the big trends. And some of the large sovereign wealth funds we've worked with do have these strategies of identifying mega trends and working out what are the really big shifts affecting me and my enterprise or the sector I'm working in. Once you've worked that out, then you look inside that to what your specific opportunity might be in. But if you're in that strong current, you want to be in the right place, handling it the right way, and you get a good ride. Thank you very much for listening to The Future of the World.